there, we made it. What are we talking about today? What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. A couple months back, I posted an episode sharing my go-to therapy tools. Not like the big heavy-hitting interventions, but like those little tools that you just always want to have handy in your back pocket just in case you might need them. And I really enjoyed making that episode. And also, it seems that you all appreciated it as well. So I thought it might be fun to do a sort of part 2 of this episode and share some more of my go-to therapy tools. Because actually, once I made that episode, then I was seeing my therapy clients the next couple weeks and I thought, oh, also this one, also that one, also this other one. So we're going to put those together in this episode. Sometimes in these episodes where I share clinical tools, I dabble in attempting to show you, like via acting in a sort of role play situation with myself, what clinical tools I'm sharing, and I feel really self-conscious about my lack of acting skills, but it seemed from the comments at least that you all appreciated that I'm at least attempting to demonstrate what this actually looks like rather than just talking about it. So I will put my self-consciousness aside and I will do it again today. So I will try to show you with examples whenever I can. And before we dive in, I just like to add the disclaimer that one, I'm really not an expert. Like I'm so not an expert. I make videos on the internet. I love talking to you all. I am a therapist and I'm qualified and trained to do therapy work, but just because I put myself on the internet doesn't mean I'm an expert in any particular clinical tool. In fact, I'm very, very solidly a generalist and not really an expert in any one particular thing. So I always like to put that out there. I'm just sharing from one therapist to another. That's what we're doing here. So if you want to learn more, you can always learn more from an expert. And of course, everything I'm sharing here does not constitute, professional advice, supervision. It's not a substitute for those things, but it can be helpful, I think, sometimes to just hear from another therapist. Like, hey, here's how I do it. Take it or leave it. One of my go-to therapy tools that I think is a lot of therapists' go-to therapy tools, especially at the beginning of treatment with a new client, is the miracle question. I have to be honest, some of these tools have been in my back pocket for so long that I don't even remember what theoretical approach they originate from. So I Googled it. And apparently this one comes from solution-focused therapy. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I am not an expert, but I feel like it applies in pretty much any situation. Basically, the general concept of the miracle question is to invite clients to share what would look different about their lives if the problem that they're coming to see us for went away. This question can serve different purposes. For me, I always like to ask this question during our initial intake session. And I often even will ask the question during the consult call, especially if I'm needing a little clarification on what exactly the person is hoping to target. Sometimes when we invite clients or potential clients to describe what it is that they're looking for support with when seeking therapy, they can be pretty vague. Like they might say something like, I just want to feel better. I just want to be happier. I just want to feel more secure. I want better self-esteem. And those are all great things, but that is really, really unspecific. So it's a lot more helpful to ask a miracle question and say something like, okay, let's say you were to meet with me for a while and you found our time helpful. What sorts of things do you imagine would be different about your life? And for two people who say, I want to feel better, they may have very different sounding answers to that question. So it just helps get at the specifics of what somebody is really wanting to target or change when they're coming to see a therapist, and that can help kind of tailor our approach. And I definitely use that question a lot when it comes to treatment planning. And the miracle question has many purposes. Like it's not just for day one of therapy or treatment planning, even if you're revisiting the treatment plan along the way, it can be useful in helping our clients develop insight as well. Like if you imagine that tomorrow you woke up and whatever problems you have in your life, if they just poof, disappeared, not only is it helpful to wonder like what would look different about life so that can help us pinpoint where some of the problems are causing friction, but it could then be helpful to ask follow-up questions like, what would that feel like to live in a life where that problem is gone? And you might learn more about what's important to somebody, where their values lie, where their priorities are, just by asking them more about what life would look like if those problems were gone. Okay, and I think we're already kind of dabbling into the next go-to clinical tool that I like to have in my back pocket. And I'm sure this has a clinical name from somewhere, but I don't remember where I learned it. It's just been so deeply sitting in my back pocket since forever that I don't know where I picked it up from. But I will just title this tool, "So if we solve this problem, then what?" Now, I know at face value that just sounds like slightly different phrasing of the miracle question again, but there is a difference. The miracle question is focusing on saying like, hey, if we could just magically solve all of your problems overnight, what would look different about your life? And, it might be like, oh, life's going to be so much better in all these different ways. I'm going to feel these different ways about it. I'm going to get along better in my relationships, et cetera, et cetera. All these positives that people are usually hoping for from their problem being resolved. But this second tool where I'm saying, okay, let's say we solve this problem, then what, is particularly looking for what additional sets of problems might be lying underneath the surface of the first problem that you're coming in for help with. Oh, excuse me laughing. It is, I get that it sounds cynical, but if we just put on our systems theory hat for a second, like anytime we change one thing about whether it's our individual lives or something about our relationship, anything, anywhere, it's going to have a ripple effect on everything else. And there's going to be things that are better or easier or more desirable, but there's also going to be things that come up that feel like new problems because we fixed the first problem. I especially like to pull this tool out if I'm sensing that a client is kind of hyper-focused on one kind of problem. It may be a very real problem for them, but they might be so focused on like, this is my one problem, that they're not able to see that there might be a lot more to the story that's affecting their day-to-day life much more than the one problem they seem so hyper-focused on. Okay, this is one of those tools that I think is just much easier to explain by example. So here's an example of what this could look like. What is it that you think you're needing in this situation? If I just had a little more cash, life would be so much easier. Now, obviously, I don't have a magic wand just like sitting in my back pocket, but I wonder if it would be helpful to ask, like, let's pretend I had that magic wand, I waved it, and suddenly we downloaded, let's say, $10 million into your bank account. Why not? Then what? Woo, $10 million. Ooh, that sounds really nice. But yeah, I guess even if I had that much money, I'd probably still feel pretty lonely. I wonder if it might be helpful for us to focus on that loneliness a bit more together, not only because I don't have $10 million to give you, but I think I'm hearing you say that even if you had that extra cash sitting in your account, you might still be feeling lonely. And I think there's some things we can do to tackle that here. I really like this approach because it creates an opportunity for the client to develop their own insight, see some of the nuance about what's going on, that maybe it's not just this one problem that they need resolved, but there might be more to the story. And in most cases, that's going to be a lot more palatable for clients to then say like, oh yeah, okay, there's some other stuff going on here, rather than if as the therapist I said like, hey, look, I know you've been complaining about money as like your singular problem, but I'm actually really worried about all these other things going on for you. I don't think you see the whole picture. I mean, obviously you wouldn't use that tone, but it can feel like that even if you try to phrase it gently. So it's nice if a client can kind of find that conclusion all by themselves. I have a few more tools left to share with you, but before we dive into those, I'd like to take a moment to thank Powbox for sponsoring today's episode. Based on a poll that I put out last year, only 1/4 of therapists are confident that the email they're using is HIPAA secure. That means that 3 out of 4 therapists listening to this ad right now either aren't using HIPAA secure email or aren't sure if it's HIPAA secure. In 2023, I made the switch to Powbox, and it's been smooth sailing since. Powbox is the simplest, most effective solution for mental health professionals to seamlessly integrate HIPAA security into our email, all while using our favorite email provider. It's just running smoothly and quietly in the background, keeping any potential space invaders from interfering with your emails. If you'd like to check out Powbox for yourself, they're offering Private Practice Skills listeners a special discount. Just use coupon code SKILLS at checkout to get $250 off your first year with Powbox. Thank you again to Powbox for sponsoring this episode, and now back to the rest of my little go-to tools. Okay, again, this tool, I don't know who to credit. I did not come up with it myself. Did a supervisor teach this to me at some point? Or I don't know. But I like to call this one surveillance camera. If I'm able to like go back and find the actual, place origin of these tools and like proper names, I'll go back and link to those in the description below. But surveillance camera, which sounds creepy now that we're talking about it, but let me explain how this one works. Basically, I like to use this tool in any moments where there's like some isolated incident where a client has gotten really emotional, whether it's anger or anxiety or something else, and they keep using this kind of vague language to describe what happened in the moment when I ask them to tell me what happened, right? They'll say things like, oh, I flipped out. Oh, I blew up. Oh, I got really mad. And I'm not really hearing what behaviors happened. Then I'll say something like, hey, if we were to imagine for a second that during that moment, there was a surveillance camera recording the whole thing and we were now watching it back together, what sorts of things would I see as I'm watching that footage back with you? Here's an example of how an interaction like this might go. Yeah, and then I just got super mad and I kind of blew up at my partner. Okay, so it sounds like things really escalated in that situation. You use this phrase blowing up, which could mean different things depending. So I wonder if you could say more about what blowing up looks like for you. I just got really mad and I flipped out, I'm wondering if you can help paint the picture for me so I can see the situation just a little more clearly. So let's just pretend, let's say there was a surveillance camera that was capturing this whole scenario you were just telling me about when you blew up. What sorts of things would I see in the footage if I were to watch it back? This can be helpful in a lot of situations, but it can be especially helpful in scenarios where we're getting emotionally flooded. A lot of times we almost black out in a way in these moments, and however we act feels out of our control. So if we can do a debrief and sort of watch ourselves in that moment, even if it's fuzzy and we don't super remember, the more we engage in that activity, the more we can bring that kind of surveillance camera with us in the moment where, let's say the next time the client flips out, there might just be a little bit more of them kind of watching themselves, and maybe eventually they can build up that outside observer enough that they can start to catch those little flags that like, oop, hey, be careful, you're about to step over that threshold. And so maybe we can intervene a little bit earlier. I find the surveillance camera question very useful, again, especially for clients who aren't quite totally aware of what's happening in their body or how they're interacting with their context, the situation that they're in, other people who are around. And so it helps them build up more self-awareness and oftentimes will flag behaviors for me that otherwise I had no clue might be happening. Just say, wait, I'm curious about that part. Tell me more what's happening when you said that, you did X, Y, Z. A lot of times there's really, really key details in there that then we can target more specifically in our work together. Okay, the next tool I do know the name for. In fact, it has many names depending on which theoretical approach you're using. Some of the ones I'm most familiar with are cognitive diffusion, if you're using an ACT framework, or just like mindful observing from a DBT framework. And in case you're like me and therapy jargon just goes in one ear and out the other, despite how many times you hear the term used, an example of a cognitive diffusion exercise is like the leaves on the stream exercise. There's a lot of different tools we can use to help our clients build up some cognitive diffusion, but the leaves on the stream tool is just one that I've heard quite a bit. There's lots in this category of like visualizations that help clients basically separate themselves just a bit from what their experiences are, their thoughts and their emotions. I feel like because so often therapists are helping clients get more in touch with their emotions, we can sometimes neglect the value of teaching clients to appropriately compartmentalize or, yes, dissociate from their thoughts and emotions, but doing so in a controlled, intentional way. I think this is particularly useful for anyone having difficulties regulating their emotions, whether it's coming from more of like a traumatic background or if just for whatever reasons you experience your thoughts and emotions quite intensely. we love some cognitive diffusion. I have found it quite valuable myself as a person who, as I like to say, has big feelings about most things in life. In order to function as a person and be responsible, I have to find ways to separate myself from some of my emotions so that they're still there, but they're just a little bit at arm's reach. And so I really like helping to teach my clients some of these tools. I'll use this tool especially on the fly in session if I'm trying to lean into some other intervention with the client and either their thoughts or their emotions are interrupting the process and making it difficult for them to actually do whatever intervention we might be trying to do. Here's an example of what that could sound like. Sorry, I'm having trouble staying focused. Could you say that again? Yeah, I'm really glad you said something, actually. Let's pause on that for a second. I'm wondering, is there something going on that's making it difficult to stay focused? It's so dumb. It's just that thought saying that I'm stupid and I'm not going to get anywhere and what's the point? Wow. Yeah, that's a really harsh thought. I would have trouble staying focused too if that soundtrack was blasting full volume in my brain. And I know that thought often chimes in when we're working on something. So maybe we can see if there's a way that we can create a little distance from that internal harsh critic. Would you be willing to try an exercise with me to see if we can help some of those thoughts just sort of pass through your mind rather than latching on and taking hold? I try not to overly jump into cognitive diffusion because sometimes we need to help our clients sit with whatever narratives, feelings, etc. they might have coming up. But I find it particularly useful if there's like a self-critic that is just so loud that whatever it is that we're trying to do in session is just getting perpetually interrupted because the peanut gallery is just flinging criticisms left and right and they can't even hear their own thoughts anymore. I usually tell clients we can't typically turn off the self-critic, certainly not immediately, maybe over time we can turn down the volume, but we can invite the self-critic to sit a little bit further away from us so we don't hear it so loud. I think of like the peanut gallery from the Muppets. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is this a millennial thing or is it the Muppet? Is it just called the Muppets? That show where there's those two always angry dudes offering their commentary. And it's sort of like, can we invite them to just sit a little bit further away so that while we're doing our thing on stage, we hear them, but it's not as loud. So whether it's the leaves on the stream exercise or a different tool, I always like to help my clients practice an exercise like this. Another way I'll frame it, especially for clients where I've used some sort of cognitive diffusion tool several times already, is, if we're leaning into some intervention, some sort of challenging topic, let's say, and they're having a lot of trouble with it because here comes the self-critic, I might say okay, let's just sort of imagine that the self-critic is rolling like credits at the end of a movie. When you're like at the end of the movie and you're still sitting there and the credits are rolling and the words are there, but you're probably not like meticulously reading every single title and name. It's just sort of like rolling and it's just there passively in the background. So that's usually kind of the goal that I have of that's just rolling in the credits in the background and we're just going to keep going and doing life. We don't need to focus on that. As a sidebar on this tool, I really wish that we would talk more about how valuable dissociation actually is. That term has so much kind of negative connotation with it because usually we associate dissociation with something that's outside of our control. We're losing control of our body. We're no longer in our body and we've dissociated. However, I think there is value in the right places, knowing when we can invite our minds or our bodies to sort of step out of the moment for a little bit because there's some intended purpose for why we're doing that. My thoughts aren't totally formed yet on this, so this might just be a meandering thing that ends up in the extended cut, or maybe if it makes no sense while I'm editing, I'll just cut it out. But I think about this a lot, especially since having kids. My capacity to, whether you want to call it compartmentalize or dissociate, has expanded significantly. I was not good at this. And maybe I'm still not good at it, but I'm definitely much better at it than I was before when the situation calls for it. And I've just been really surprised and sort of impressed by, I don't know, my brain's ability to sort of rewire and say like, you know what, some of those things that were kind of a big deal before, maybe they don't matter so much anymore because there's something that's an even bigger deal right in front of you. So we're going to do that right now. I think of like, I won't share the details in case anybody might find this triggering, but our family was in a significant car crash 2 years ago. I'm sparing the details of what happened on purpose. Everyone's okay. But in the moment, I could feel this sense of like, I am in a traumatic incident right now, and my children need me. And so whatever trauma is there, honey, we're going to take care of that later. But right now, you got to take care of your kids. And I felt both very present to my children and very dissociated from my own experience. And I thought about this after of like an earlier version of Marie before children would have just been panicking in that car crash incident, like genuinely having, panic attack symptoms, I think appropriately so. And none of that happened. I could physically feel my body dissociating from all of that to say, hey, your kids need you right now. So we're going to do that. We're just going to do that. And everything else needs to go somewhere else and we'll come back to it later. And yeah, like once everyone was home, I feel like we're all safe and all of that. Like I just started crying like, oh my gosh, finally, like we come back to the thing that I dissociated from. That was okay. A tangent, but I think about that a lot of like, yeah, that was the appropriate thing to do in the situation, in my opinion. And so learning how to appropriately and intentionally dissociate, I think is quite useful. And maybe, yeah, the proper term then is compartmentalizing when we're doing it on purpose. But when our bodies dissociate outside of our control, it is a coping skill. And it's just nice to develop a little bit more of a muscle where we feel like we can control that. Okay, and I have one last tool to share for today's episode. Who knows, maybe there will be more episodes. But after I filmed the first episode sharing my go-to therapy tools, I saw clients after and realized there's a tool that I genuinely use all the time. And I like to call this one seeing your emotions as passengers in the car. Again, if this is a proper clinical tool that has a name, I am out of the loop on it, but I don't think I am the original creator of this tool. I'm pretty sure I heard it somewhere in consult supervision training, and now I don't remember where I learned it, so that is why I'm not giving proper credit. But emotions as a passenger in the car. Basically, the idea is, so many times we feel like we can't accomplish certain tasks because our emotions are too big. We're too overwhelmed by our emotions. I like to pull this tool out when a client is telling me that they're not able to do something because their emotions or sometimes their self-criticism is too intense or too loud. And so therefore they can't do this thing that might actually be quite important to them to do. I mean, kind of a little bit lighthearted example might be someone who says like, oh, I can't ask her out because I'm too anxious and I got to figure out my anxiety first before asking her out. And, a lot of us as therapists might say like, yeah, sure, we'll give you some tools to help with your anxiety, but also you're probably going to be feeling really nervous when you ask her out. So can we help you have enough tools to go into it, bringing the anxiety with you? The anxiety is going to be a passenger in that car. And the way that I like to frame it with my clients is often I'll say something like, it's like you're on the sidewalk trying to get into your car and the anxiety is trying to get in the car with you and you're fighting it by saying like, no, anxiety, you are staying home today. You're not getting in the car. And now you're just in an argument fighting on the sidewalk with your anxiety, but you're not getting anywhere. And so might it be much more helpful to say, okay, anxiety, if you're going to come, you're going to sit in the back seat. You're going to buckle up. You're going to let me drive this car though. Okay. I'm driving. You can come with me and offer your commentary in the back, but you're not going to be the driver of this car. So there's different ways to kind of expand on this metaphor, but I think it's a really good fit for a lot of things. It kind of feels similar to the last tool that I shared as well. Like it could be the peanut gallery of self-criticism, yelling at you from the back seat, but buckled in safely. Here's an example of how I might bring this up in a session. I'm just so anxious. I don't think I can do it. I'm going to be anxious the entire time I ask her out, and I'm going to mess it up. So I need to get rid of this anxiety first so I can be myself. Sometimes when we get really anxious about something, we can spend so much energy trying to reduce or eliminate the anxiety that we never actually achieve what we set out to do to begin with. You've been thinking about asking Gina out for, I think, months now, and that anxiety has really held you back the entire time. So I wonder if there could be a way for you to maybe bring your anxiety with you while you ask her out. Wait, you can do that? What do you mean exactly? Well, let's say we think of you asking Gina out as taking a car ride from point A to point B. You've been hanging out at point A for a little while, standing at the curb, kind of arguing with your anxiety because you're trying so desperately to keep it out of the car so you can get to point B and ask Gina out. But what if instead of spending all your energy trying to keep your anxiety out of the car, you let it come with you as a passenger in the back seat? It's going to be hanging out back there, offering its running commentary, but it can be safely buckled up while you're in the driver's seat in charge of where the car is going. Yeah, I guess I never thought of it that way, but that is a helpful visual. I feel a little better. Like, I don't want to feel anxious, but I'm also tired of fighting, and I'm afraid I'm never going to ask her out at this rate, so it seems worth a try. So I wonder if it could be helpful for us to explore what tools will help you feel like your anxiety can stay safely in the back seat, away from the driver's seat, so you don't have to be afraid that anxiety might hijack the car and deter you from your destination or put you in danger. And sometimes we might find that there's like a few different emotions hanging out in the back seat. Maybe we need to be driving a minivan for everybody to fit. I usually encourage clients to see if there's a way for them to sit in the back seat rather than the front seat. Otherwise, it could start to feel like there's this scene. I think this happens in many different shows, but I'm remembering a scene from Modern Family where Manny is like 14 or something driving the car, and Gloria from the passenger seat tries to climb into the driver's seat, which obviously is the terrifying situation. Like, we do not want to be driving the car, and our emotion or self-criticism just hijacks the car from us, basically. And a lot of times, if we willingly bring our emotions with us rather than like continuously trying to kick them to the curb, as with humans, they're just a lot nicer to be around. There's a lot less of a power struggle. And importantly, we can feel empowered to get to our destination. This is a tool that I also use a lot, again, because I have big emotions about most things in life. And so I'm always asking myself, like, rather than getting rid of that emotion, how can I feel like that emotion is just riding with me in the back? I might try to think through things like the metaphorical version of like letting my anxiety ride in the back seat, but like I'm going to give it a snack, like maybe that might look like I have some tools to help me cope with my anxiety. If somebody's terrified of flying on a plane, do they feel a little bit better if they know they have a PRN in their pocket for an anti-anxiety med? Maybe they don't even need to use it, but they know it's there. And that's kind of a way of letting their anxiety come with them. Say, anxiety, I gave you a snack. You're going to ride in the back seat, but I am driving this car. Well, I think this might be a good spot to end this episode for today. I'm having fun with this style, kind of dabbling in the clinical, not the like super expert clinical things, but like the day-to-day clinical things that we all do as therapists, whether we're an expert in a certain thing or not. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you're interested in more clinical stuff, or if this isn't your vibe, let me know that too. I'd love to hear from you. But I hope this was helpful for whatever purposes it might have served for you today. Whew. Well, thank you again for joining me, for putting up with my whatever version of acting skills I have today. I don't know. I filmed this part first and then I filmed the acting part so that my self-critic doesn't take over and destroy the entire video. So I don't know yet what the acting is going to look like, basically. It feels similar to some of the things we talked about today. And on that note, I think it's time. Until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well. Is it just me, or have I been spinning in my chair more this time than usual? Sorry, I don't know. I'll find out when I edit this episode if that happened. I'm so sorry.